when we're being ashamed, when we're being abandoned, when we're being rejected, especially within a public setting, we actually, that shift in perception of who we are, we doubt our skills, we doubt our gifts, we doubt our abilities. And we then start to operate from a place of lower worth, low self-esteem, because we're so afraid we go into survival mindset. We're afraid to put our hands up in the work meeting. We're afraid to go after that promotion. We're afraid to date someone we really like. We stay with a relationship that's safe because we actually stop believing in our greatness.
Hey friends, welcome to The Good Life with Michelle Lamoureux, a show for women in midlife who want to live happier, healthier, and more meaningful lives. I'm your host, Michelle Lamoureux, a self-love coach and the author of Design a Life You Love. And together we're going to be doing just that. Each week I bring on world-class experts, best-selling authors, leading entrepreneurs, and also do solo casts with the intention of inviting you to get connected to what you really desire from your life. This show is produced with love every week. There's inspiration and actionable tips in every episode because I want to see women playing a starring role in their lives instead of living on the sidelines. Be sure to join the Good Life community newsletter over at thegoodlifecoach.com for more inspiration and tips to live your best midlife. And make sure you're following the show on your favorite podcast player. I'm so glad that you're here. Hey friends, welcome back to the show. Today we're talking about invisible loss with Christina Rasmussen, who's an acclaimed grief educator and best-selling author of Second First and Where Did You Go? And her most recent book, Invisible Loss, which is going to be out by the time this interview airs, Christina. In 2010, 4 years after her 35-year-old spouse passed away from stage 4 colon cancer, she created the Life Reentry process, which launched her on a mission to bring compassion, grace, and validation to thousands while simultaneously establishing an exit from what she termed the waiting room, which we're going to be exploring today. Christina holds a master's degree in guidance and counseling, and she's currently finishing her master's of fine arts degree in painting and drawing. Her grief work has been featured on ABC News and in Women's World, The Washington Post, and the White House blog. Welcome, Christina.
So good to be here, Michelle. I feel like we're friends already.
I do too. We chatted a little bit before the mic. It's like,
Yes.
there's old soul energy going
Yes.
here. I don't know. We got to hang out when I come to Austin.
I love it. Yes, please.
Or come to San Diego.
Yes.
I think it's really important to understand the significance of your work by going back a little bit. I think I think it's important for people to understand. So how did you initially, because I understand you also studied grief. So before you had your own loss, I'm curious why you chose that path. And then after reading your book, I was wondering on some level if your loss of not being able to study art when you were in high school was part of your desire to want to learn about grief to help heal others from disappointment. That I just...
I love that. That's part of my book where I talk about art, one of the biggest invisible losses of my life, for sure. And until now I'm making it come true. But everything started in my 20s. I was in the UK. I was doing my master's in guidance and counseling, and it was time for thesis and specializing. And I knew then somehow that I wanted to find a way to support people who lost someone they loved, because I could not imagine how it would be to ever say goodbye to someone I loved. I loved people so much. I'm a very enthusiastic, passionate person, and I just couldn't imagine losing someone I loved. And I remember the time my professor saying to me, "You're such a happy person, Christina. Why would you study grief?" And that's what I said to her. I said, "I want to know how can anyone overcome it or live a normal life again after something so devastating?" And of course, Michelle, at the time, I had no idea that just a little bit after, it was, I would say, gosh, it was about 5 years after, around about then, where my 31-year-old husband was diagnosed for the first time with stage 4 from the beginning. He lived to be 35, but I remember, and we had just moved to the Boston area from California, and we got the diagnosis pretty quickly. As soon as we got there, and we had no idea before. We had no family around, and I remember he was 31, I was 30, and the girls, our daughters, were at the time of diagnosis 9 months old and 2.5 years old.
Oh God.
And I wanted to die, and I wanted to be the one. I didn't want to experience losing him. It was everything I was ever taught about grief could not cover it, could not prepare me. It was like a heart surgeon having heart surgery. Like, it doesn't matter what you know about how to do the surgery. It's your heart,
Yes.
And I didn't think I was equipped. I was angry at the world that the skills I had, the knowledge I had before any of this happened. When we moved to Houston, Texas, I was facilitating support groups for people who lost their spouses. This is before anything.
You're kidding.
After my master's and before that window.
Oh my God.
And part of the hospice program, I used to go and sit with the dying when their families had to go and have a shower and have a break, and I would sit there next to them, because I really felt, and of course now looking back, Michelle, I always get goosebumps that this road, this map, this path was predestined somehow. It always makes me feel emotional, or like I just feel this a lot, because at the time I had no knowledge of the future, and having done all of that and having seen death, having witnessed it in others, having studied it, nothing could have prepared me. It was catastrophic. And I remember, and I want to say this, I remember the principal of my daughter's high school in Concord, Mass, as we were going through his diagnosis and his treatments in Boston, she said to me, what you're about to experience when he passes away is much worse than this. Because I was telling her, I'm prepared. I'm preparing myself. Because he was terminal.
Yes.
We knew.
Yes.
And she said, it will be different. And she was right. I didn't think I could ever recover from this. And that's what I remember saying to myself, if I ever make it back to life and feeling alive again, I'm going to go back and just get everyone else who's stuck there somewhere in a life that is not worth living after such a devastating loss. And that's what I did. A few years had to go by before I resigned from my corporate job and started writing slowly. And I'm an introvert, even though I sound social. I like to hide. Don't put me in front of cameras. I tell everyone, don't pitch me anywhere big. And for me, it was such a big step to step back and try and figure out a way to help others find their way back to life, and how Life Reentry and the work began in 2010.
Okay. Yeah. So what you just said, it was like, I felt when you were talking about you had to go, what you were studying, everything was sort of aligned. Like maybe this path was laid out for you and the work that you were doing so that you could be here, and that it's bringing tears to my eyes. I had another guest on this week who lost her son. He was 19. I'm
so sorry.
And she found her work through singing bowls, like the crystal.
Yes.
The sound bath, and was a musician. And she said something similar. And it's interesting because I find that sometimes when I do interviews, not consciously, but these themes start emerging. And, I always ask people, like, if they're an entrepreneur, like, can you look at your through line? Now that you're further ahead, you can look back and you can see the dots that connect. But usually it's through, an entrepreneurial journey, not through loss. But this is such an important conversation. I mean, my show's for midlife women, and there's so much loss happening. I know a woman who wrote to me recently, who I knew professionally. She found my show. I haven't talked to her in 20 years. Her husband passed away from a heart attack on her daughter's 10th birthday. Suddenly, at like 50.
Yeah.
And so
that's young. It's young.
So
it's
young. Well, 31. My goodness,
But,
Christina.
and I didn't know how young that was then.
Okay,
You feel old. Remember when we were younger, we thought
yes, we do. We think we know everything.
I thought, oh my gosh, my whole life is, and I didn't know how much time I had to live without him after. Like it was so long. It's so long. It's,
Christina.
you know what I mean? Like concept of
Yes.
time confusing to me at the time. I didn't know how much time we would have had without him. The kids, the girls
These little
without him.
babies, they're so
A lot more
young.
than what they had with him, which was very little. Yeah.
And that's a lot to carry as a mom. I mean, with a
Yes.
9-month-old, I mean, and you said 2-year-old for your
Two
other
and a
daughter?
half
Two
in
and a
the
half?
diagnosis, and we had to talk to the girls
Oh,
when
4
daddy
years
had
after. Yes.
a stomach ache. We would say daddy has just stomach pain, and they saw him throw up and like all that stuff. But we were always very honest. I've always talked about, as parents, we have to be honest with our kids, however old they are, because they sense something is not
Yeah.
right.
Yes.
And we always have to be honest in a kind and loving way, but no lies when it comes to things like that. We're not protecting them, we're hurting them in a way. Yeah.
Absolutely. You're right. Because they sense things. And if you don't
Yes.
confirm what they're feeling, then they start doubting themselves and
And
they're knowing.
they're
Yeah.
confused about how they're understanding the world around them. So yeah.
Yeah. No, this is important. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, and people are losing parent. I mean, yes. And what you said about the loss when you love and you love so deep.
And so young, you're so young,
So young.
and you're romanticizing your life. You don't know what could happen. You're young, you have babies, all your friends have babies, and you are just living your life, and then and it did change everything. I mean, it changed me completely.
Yeah.
Like everything in every way. And everyone who goes through, and I know today we will talk about invisible loss a lot more, but I want to start by saying that anyone who's gone through or will ever go through tragic loss, it completely changes everything, because you cannot go back to the person you used to be. It's impossible. Don't try. I tried. And you cannot feel happiness the way you used to feel happiness. The reasons for joy will have to change. Everything is different, and it's a long road. And I was grateful for the long road. It was a long road. I always say, as this book is coming out, what I say to my family and friends, and I don't think I've said this publicly yet, but here it is. I feel like we know each other. I say I'm about to exit, even though this book comes out June 18th. I feel like I'm exiting this last 14 years of bringing people back from being stuck in what I call that waiting room, that between the life we leave behind and the life we could have. And 14 years, 3 books. I've given my life to this service while I was raising my daughters. I was remarried, having blended families. I mean, talk about midlife, talk about so many things. I've learned so many lessons, and now I'm entering. I don't know what's going to be on the other side of that June 18th portal or door or place. I don't know what it is, but I'm excited to enter it. And my daughters said to me, they are so grateful to see that even I'm 52 years old. I'm very proud. I talk about my age all the time because, we shouldn't be ashamed of however old we are. And I love being 52, and my daughters are looking at me living this life, being an art student, launching a book, like doing all these amazing things. And they know that their life is long, and they will have opportunity at different ages in their life, because we are modeling that for our children, that as women, especially, I will never retire of any, like I will continue to create probably a lot of paintings until the day I die. There's no doubt in my mind whenever that's going to be. I believe in that. I live like that, but I'm exiting this last 14 years of this service and maybe this identity. And I can't wait to see what happens next.
I
Yeah.
can't either. Yeah, it's like a
Yeah.
rebirthing something new. And
Yes.
it's the work that you talk about in an invisible loss too. You're doing it for yourself. You're walking your talk.
Yes. And everyone tells us how it's so important to be of service, and it is, right? And it is important to do things for others and to teach. But the most important thing, Michelle, I learned, especially the last few years, as I was writing this, as I was teaching my classes, I learned that we are not here to just help others. That's great. But we are here to find out who we are. We're here to fulfill our own path. And I will say this so loudly and so clearly so anyone can hear me. For every woman who's listening to this, I want everyone to be selfish, because that is not selfish. To choose yourself first, to choose you, choose what you crave for in your life, what you want. Anything else is the waiting room. And we'll talk about that. Anything else is being stuck in between something you left behind and something you could have. And I know this very well. Millions of people die in the waiting room thinking that's their life, thinking it's supposed to be hard. No, guys, no matter what has happened to you, and I can speak from experience, it's not supposed to be hard. When we're on the right path, it's easy. It's easy. It's supposed to flow. It's supposed to feel right. It's not supposed to feel like work. It's supposed to, like, you wake up in the morning and say, and let me say, it took me many years to be in this place where I am right now. Wake up in the morning and say, I can't wait to do this. And it took a lot of mental stacking. There's exercises, a lot of mental stacking, a lot of exercise, a lot of work. Especially the last 6 months, let me tell you, to be where I am right now, a lot of work to be there, but it's worth it. And that is about self-love. We hear about that a lot. But what is that? It's choosing yourself in everything.
You're speaking my language. I love this so much. And honestly, I relaunched. I had a podcast at 38, but then I became pregnant with my daughter. First time mom. I had miscarried like the year prior. And I was like, you know what? I don't know how to do a show and be the mom I want to be. And so anyway, I relaunched at 48. But the reason when I relaunched was really what you're talking about. I don't want any woman looking back at the end of her life and go, I lived for everybody else but me. What a bummer. Like, shoot, that's not what I intended, but life gets busy and you do prioritize everyone, because that's how we're taught to show love too. We're conditioned to do it that way. And I 100% agree. It's not selfish no, it's not. So we're totally aligned. So we are going to transition to the invisible loss, because I think what you're writing and talking about in your book is really genius. It's so critical, like all these little losses. But for anyone who is going through grief, because I know this is a season in a lot of women's life, your books, like you have the Life Reentry, where can they get some support? Because you've done the work, and I'd love to offer them something there too.
Anyone who's listening who's experienced a tragic loss, I want to say I always say this, people come to me all the time and say, what do we do? My work is not when we first experience loss. It's when we have done some healing, when you go to see your therapist, when you find a local support group. I say to people always, go find a group of people that you can share this with that have gone through a very similar experience. And speak to a therapist weekly. That's what needs to happen before my work on Life Reentry, before my books come in. I want people to be ready to say yes to taking those steps. And these are not easy things to do, to step outside of the waiting room. You have to have been there for a little bit. So anyone who's listening who's just experienced something tragic, please reach out to your local resources. That's the best way, because we need that in-person experience. We need that therapist. We need that support group. After that, when they're ready for the tragic loss, I would start with second firsts if you lost a spouse, especially, and then move to the other books. But for anyone else, and what I discovered, which was absolutely mind-blowing to me as I was doing all these classes, and I've taught my Life Reentry work for a long time, for 14 years. Imagine thousands of people from all over the world. Around 2015, 16, I started seeing something that it wasn't the tragedy that was pulling people back into the waiting room. And Michelle, I said to myself, what is that? This is not, it's easy for me to say it's just grief that lasts forever, right? We hear that all the time.
Yeah.
And that's when I started seeing that what was getting people stuck after time had gone by was not the tragedy, was invisible, something. That's why I called it invisible loss. It doesn't have a name. It doesn't have a I met with a journalist the other day and I said to her, hopefully this work and this book will actually create a place and a name for what I now coined as invisible loss, because we will start putting language and words around it.
Yes.
But I found this phantom like experience, and we would do this exercise that I call the cleanse, and it's in the book, where within the group, within, let's say 150 people, 110 people, and that's a large group, I asked people to be their most honest self and write whatever's on their mind so I could find it. I wanted to find what was pulling them back into that stuck place, to that anxiety, to that feeling of loss, but it was not the tragedy. It was a pretty, I have to say, a little too risky to think that, because who am I to say that it's not the tragedy that's pulling them back in?
Right.
But I'm glad that I didn't take that for granted. I didn't say, of course, it's the tragedy. And it was an invisible loss or two or three that taking place earlier in their life. And what invisible loss is, it's kind of an unacknowledged kind of emotional punch of rejection, of abandonment, public experiences, people in classrooms, the teacher shaming them, they don't know the answer, being in with parents that, let's say, they look at you, but they look through you, they don't really see you, having an experience that's a little different to anyone else in your surroundings, and you feel a little different. I have stories in the book just to give a general understanding of it, but it is an experience that it's not acknowledged, it's not validated, and it's not, for example, people say, is it like a secondary loss? I say, no, actually, invisible loss is very tragic, because we spent our life living the wrong life, because we are not stepping into the life with that, what I call the original self, the self before invisible loss shifted their perception of who they were. Yes. Because when we're being ashamed, when we're being abandoned, when we're being rejected, especially within a public setting, we actually, that shift in perception of who we are, we doubt our skills, we doubt our gifts, we doubt our abilities, and we then start to operate from a place of lower worth, low self-esteem, because we're so afraid. We go into survival mindset. We're afraid to put our hands up in the work meeting. We're afraid to go after that promotion. We're afraid to date someone we really like. We stay with a relationship that's safe, because we actually stopped believing in our greatness a long time ago. And we spend our time living the life that is actually not ours.
Yeah. And you can feel it. But like you said, sometimes you're stuck in this place of, well, my life's good enough. You write in the book, you wrote, compared to most, my problems are small. I should be happy with what I've got. Our inner judge often tells us grief is, quote unquote, allowed for big losses, but that we should tough out everyday heartbreak. And then you said that this unacknowledged type of grief, invisible losses that are often labeled as not worthy of recognition, can be hard to define and may surface as feelings of anxiety, depression, angst, or restlessness. These are the moments when we shift perception of ourselves and can end up living in continuous survival mode without really recognizing or understanding why. I think the majority of people are there. So that's why I think your book is so important. I think that's... Yes.
I had to write that a million times in a million ways to kind of really get the actual essence of what it is, because I won't be there next to the book telling people now that they haven't. And it took this book I wrote it 3 different times to get it right, because it's a new concept, and we have together, as we're sitting here, Michelle, together educating the listener to look at their life from that point of view, and they will see so many things that have been hidden from a society, from a world that has no compassion, or they have not been taught to have compassion for those horrible experiences. How many times have we felt abandoned and rejected or isolated within a friend group or within a work setting or within a family setting, that and we just have to go through this alone.
Yeah.
Like alone completely. We are not telling anyone about it, because what do we
Yeah.
say? And then people tell us, you should be so grateful. Look at all the life you have. That is not actually reflecting the modern life. In our modern life, in our everyday life, poverty is an internal experience. It's
Yeah.
not you and I, and I'm gonna get pushback. I know this. This it's okay. This is the way this conversation is gonna have to happen. That in our everyday life, our fears are not stemming from being homeless. That I could be homeless. That I could have no food on the table. It's a different kind of fear. It's a fear of maybe losing love, and not romantic love, losing the respect and affection and being seen by others. We are
Yeah.
afraid of that because we know how that feels. So we shrink ourselves so much. No risk taking, not trying to be the crazy selves that we are. Because what if they don't like me like this?
Yeah. Wanting to fit, and it's for
Yes.
survival. Like you said, it's a survivorship. I'll share two examples.
Yes,
So
please.
I'll share one from my life, and one I was on Instagram and saw Jennifer Aniston say she was at a table when obviously sharing something she said, so it won't be exactly correct, but she was 11 years old, sitting with a group of adults, and one of the adults at the table said, "You can leave now since you have nothing interesting to add to the conversation." So the fact that as an adult in this video, it looks like she's at some award ceremony or something, dressed up gorgeous, and I don't know what the context is, but the fact that she shared that as a woman in her, let's say she's 40s or 50s in that video, that was probably an invisible loss that made her. And she said, once I was on Friends and people said, "Oh, this has added so much to my life." It changed again her perception, but it went back to that 11-year-old girl.
So I'm so glad you're bringing this example. This is the perfect example of invisible loss. It's
Right?
exactly
So
like
simple.
that.
One comment at 11, one comment seems innocent, right? Shouldn't make a change the way you show up. Yes, it does.
It's catastrophic because that comment stays, and that's when you step in the waiting and say, "I better not go and sit at the grown-up table. I better not go and sit at the popular table.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to add." No matter how famous or celebrity or incredible, successful you are, there are people who are listening to this, and I know they're going to be nodding their heads, Michelle. I know this. I know you know this, that no matter what you create in your life,
Yeah.
if you've experienced a certain kind of invisible loss similar to those, that voice somehow stays and it becomes louder and louder and it keeps you from shining. And that's
Yes.
what this book is about. It was hard to get this book out into the world, but it was meant to be. I have a lot of stories about that, but it was meant to be so we can find a way to understand this and actually create a compassionate society that allows the validation and the sharing and the processing of something like this. So we exit that waiting room protective space and we don't stay there forever.
And you also talk about how one person's experience and another person's experience, they can have the same sort of situation, but for one person, it becomes that invisible loss, and for the other person, it doesn't. So that's why it makes it a little bit tricky because.
And it is.
Yeah.
And
but you have to know how those wounds, what cut.
And you know that you have to trust that for you, this is the way it feels. So when we feel, I talk about, I have to share this personal invisible loss that it took me a long time to share because I was so embarrassed and ashamed, and because my survivor self kept saying, "Don't share this," how shaming it is. And I was uninvited. Years, this was in 2014, 15. Just a little earlier from when I was understanding the work in this way as well. I was uninvited from a dinner with some popular authors. And it was I will never forget that moment in time. And it took me such a long time to share it, but hey, here it is. And we've all maybe not experienced it in this way, but in other ways, we are not invited in different places because maybe we're not special enough or whatever we are being perceived as, or we perceive ourselves as. I was at this place and I was invited by one person who was going to this dinner. And maybe she made a mistake. There was not enough seats or whatever, however it was, it doesn't matter. I'm waiting. We're all waiting with these popular people, in quotation marks, if people can't see me, waiting to go. And I see this person coming towards me and she says, "I'm so sorry, Christina, but you can't come with us anymore."
Oh my God. That's, isn't it? That feels so seventh grade too, doesn't it? Yeah.
Let me just say, I was so like, I didn't know what she was talking about.
Right.
It was just didn't make any sense to me whatsoever. She said, "I'm sorry, I made a mistake. I'm so sorry." She felt terrible too, but she was the messenger. She had to give this message. So I'm sorry you can't come. And of course, I was so shocked. I didn't ask, "What are you talking about? Why? What's going on?" Because I knew I had to walk with them and get in the same elevator.
And then not go.
And go downstairs, be in this elevator. I'll never forget it.
Oh my goodness.
Knowing that they knew I wasn't coming with them, and me sitting there, it was in New York City. I was visiting New York City, and we exited the elevator and the building, and I took a left. They all took a right, and I cried my eyes out.
Oh, Christina.
And then I said to myself, "How can this be so upsetting for you? You've been through so much tragedy in your life. How you're so tough." This is when I started seeing it in others in my classes, seeing myself. I was so heartbroken from something like this that I sobbed in my hotel room for hours, right?
Yeah.
The next day, my eyes were like as if I was crying for days. And I was mad at myself at the time. I couldn't understand why something like this.
Yeah.
That's not on me. This is on them. This has nothing to do with, I've done nothing wrong. And I knew that logically, but that would not make me stop crying. And I had gone through loss and death and tragedy, and yet I was experiencing a different form of loss and grief. And I had to understand it. So for anyone who's not invited, who has been pushed aside, know that it's for real. This is a real pain and a real loss. And I want everyone to feel seen and validated about this. And why I'm sharing something that is difficult to share, that is important that we share these stories and we talk about these things.
Yeah, so people don't feel alone with it. So what I have learned or felt with stuff like that is when it cuts so deep, that is when you know that's an old wound. And then, so those tears were like, yes, you could have handled the one, like, an invitation, which is so ridiculous. I can't even imagine like who thought that was a normal thing to do, but that's on them. Like you said, that's ridiculous. But then there's younger Christina who may have had those times of feeling excluded and not seen and just wanting to be connected and to feel like you matter around other people. And so those tears were those old. And so it's becomes the gift once you're in a place where you can process, but in that moment, it's your little girl. So you've mentioned the waiting room a couple of times. So talk to us, what is the waiting room? Because this is where a lot of people are hanging out.
Yes. So when I first discovered it was all the way back in the beginning. And I said to myself, I'm a very visual person. I see everything. I see my thoughts. I see you see me, for those who can't see me, I'm always, when I'm speaking, I'm looking out in somewhere, because I see everything I say. So for me, I saw this place that we go to after a significant, and when I say significant event or a significant loss, I do include invisible loss, because in invisible losses, especially the primary ones, are actually, they can derail our whole path. They derail, even if it's just a small derailment. It's a little bit of the wrong job. It's a little bit of the wrong relationship, but not quite. Actually, it's more catastrophic when our life is slightly wrong because we will never get it right because it's not wrong enough to fix it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that's a waiting
Yes.
room. So here's what the waiting room is. We leave behind, especially for invisible loss. So I'm gonna talk about the waiting room from the invisible loss of the original self, of who we are. When we leave the life and the version of ourselves behind, when something has taken place that is unacknowledged, that is like, and I use that phrase, an emotional punch. We got hit.
Yeah.
We maybe didn't even cry, but we were ashamed. We felt
Less than.
we felt like we lost the sense of who we are in that moment in time, that we put ourselves down because of that experience. And after that experience, we go to a place after that self that we used to be, that life before, and who we get to be beyond that. It's a place in between. We live in the middle of the old life and the middle of the life that we, and outside of the life we could have. And in that place, the most invisible losses and the most invisible kind of waiting rooms come from a good enough life, a life that is okay, that is fine, that other people want to have.
Yeah.
But you have it, and people
Which
say,
is why
"Look
you
at
don't want to
her."
complain, because you're like, oh my goodness.
Why would you, according to the world, you shouldn't complain. Look at Michelle. She has this great job. She's an amazing coach. She has all these amazing clients. She has this amazing podcast. She has her life. She looks beautiful. She's healthy. She's strong. She has a roof over her head. And then you say to yourself, yeah, that's right. I have all those things. What do I have to complain about? And that is the most dangerous waiting room we experience, because it is completely hidden. We will never leave it unless we have these conversations. So that's where we get stuck and we stay there. It's a little comfortable and a little uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's not either or. It's you know deep down there's a dread sometimes when you wake up in the morning. You feel like you're struggling sometimes to have your day. Some of your relationships are not right, but it's good enough. It's fine. There's some things in your life that you want to change, but you don't even allow yourself the time to consider that. Your life is great for others when they look at it, and good enough for you.
Yes.
And that is what a waiting room looks like.
That's what keeps you stuck.
That is what keeps you stuck.
Yes.
And from an invisible loss of that original self that you left behind when you got punched, when you experienced that first, I call them moments of impact. When you experience that moment of big impact of being uninvited, of not being seen in a meeting, in a conversation, in an interview. And I was preparing myself. This is my third round of public interviews for my third book. And in December, I started having panic attacks. Severe panic attacks. And I was like, what's going on right now? Why am I having a panic attack? And I was just starting to put the team together. I just started to like, okay, who's the person? What do we need to do to start the journey? I had my first meeting with the marketing team for my publisher, and it was all happening at the same time. And all of a sudden, Michelle, this is why it's important that we share this. I had severe panic attacks that would happen every day for a few weeks. I thought I was having a heart attack.
Wow.
I thought I was going to die. It was that severe, and I could not control them.
Oh my gosh.
And I started putting this work in place daily. I worked. So I went to the doctor.
She made sure your heart was okay.
Make sure my heart is okay. She also said, are you stepping into menopause right now? And she goes, your resilience that you've built all your life, apparently it's supposed to go downhill. I said, get out of here. What? I'm a resilient person. But it was my fear of being seen, because I've had experiences just like the one you shared. I've had many experiences similar to that. Also being, as you know, being in more public experience, you have to knock on doors and say, can I come into your show? Will you share about my work? Will you share about me? And the people sometimes will not do it.
Yeah.
But when you meet them, they show interest. But when you're asking them for something, which is very hard to do, by the way, to ask for anything,
yes,
they then And it doesn't happen, thank God, very often. But when it does, however few times this has happened in the last 14 years, it's hard not to take it personally. So I was preparing myself for that. And I was starting to put myself in the waiting room as I was preparing to exit and be in the public. And that does not work. And let me tell you this, the waiting room that I've been in, the longest one, and there's been others, is that low self-esteem and self-worth, and why the public facing work has always been so hard for me until the last, I'm going to be very specific, things started to change about 6 weeks ago.
Oh, wow. That recent.
Yes. And
because of the work you did?
I mean, I had to do I had to rewrite everything in my mind. I had to do the work in my body. I had to do spiritually, mentally. I had to do the work I've been teaching, and I've done it in other ways for different things, but not at the level of this waiting room when my life looked so great. The greater your life looked, the better, the more successful you are, the more people see you in this great place. You question your struggles. Why are you struggling? You shouldn't be struggling. Why am I struggling with this? I was, what? It must be that I'm having a heart attack, because it could not be anxiety and stress, because I've done this twice before and I've done it a million times. What is wrong with me? But I was in the waiting room of not really seeing the gifts of who I am. I didn't believe in them. I didn't believe on my worth. Others believed it. I didn't somehow. And I didn't discover this, Michelle, until very recently. And let me tell you, that changed everything.
Yeah. But I think what you're saying is really important, because I think the work is always there. And
Yes.
as you keep going towards your true nature, your true purpose, your true gifts, the old voice wants to keep you safe, and it's going to get loud and make you uncomfortable, trying to keep you back in that waiting room where it sees you're like really moving forward, right? It's like, oh, wait, she's really going for this. And you even said it before. You said, I just feel like I'm exiting and entering something new, which is also why this is feeling so big and poking. So maybe, again, the gift is like being able to like, okay, where do I still need to dust off? Where do I still have these limiting beliefs?
You're a great coach, by the way.
Oh,
you really are. I can tell. And all your clients are very lucky to have you. And I mean this in every way possible. Like, you are able to pick up not only from the concepts of the work, but everything I'm saying, the way you reflect it. It's like, she can see me.
I see you. I see you, and I feel you. I feel you deeply. I do, but you are all of us. I think that's what women, I think that's what, the women are going to take away. You are all of us, your journey, your struggles. Like, it looks, we all have our own different stories and our own different wounds and everything, but the essence of not feeling lovable or worthy or enough, we're all struggling with some level of that. So talk to us about that wiser, knowing voice. You talk about two different parts, the watcher and the thriver. I think having some of this language will be helpful for women.
I could see there were three narrators that are taking place within ourselves. There's three points of view that are going on in every human being. This is not just, people, I've had emails over the years saying, I don't think I have a survivor self. I'm tough. I've been through so much. And I'm like, because you're tough and you've been through so much, you are definitely surviving. Yes. People sometimes didn't like to hear that, but then they would discover that what does it look like to survive? And it's not what people think it does. So
they can be rewarded for that.
Oh my God. Yes, exactly right. Surviving is, people say, oh, look at how tough she is. Look at all this. She's in the battlefield every day. She works so hard. Here, right.
No. And then that person feels bad about saying, actually, I've got some vulnerability or some pain. And so I don't want to disappoint everyone else. So I'm just going to keep suffering, even though I didn't realize I was. Yeah.
And some people actually take their life because nobody knew how much they were suffering. And we don't know. People say, I never knew. Their life looked so great. They had everything. True. Why would they take their life? They must be mentally ill, or it doesn't make any sense, right? So there's three narrators, and we are hearing three different stories, but the survivor version of our reality is, if I got to put percentages around those narrators that we have inside of us, the survivor self is about 85%. And imagine if you are just living your life, you haven't done any work of any kind, of anything, even a little bit, or you haven't done it in a while. 85% of what your thoughts are basically make sure that they like you over there and show up this way. Make sure your boss says yes to this project because they know how great you are, and this is the way you're gonna be. You're gonna get on that plane. You're gonna go in that meeting, even though your son has you have to make these choices. That survival and that survivor voice, the survivor behavior. For most of us, it's about 85% of our everyday life, and I know that's a lot. And it took me a long time to say that percentage, but unfortunately, that's what it is. That 10%, there's a 10% of that watcher voice, which is the wise part of you that has been with you all along from day one. The voice, do you want to call it the higher self? You want to call it your soul? You want to call it that inner wisdom, that inner narrator that knows the truth about who you are, about your skills, about your gifts, the incredible woman that you are. That voice is only at 10%, and it has been suppressed from that survival mechanism that we are so used to having.
Yes.
And the last part of us is the thriver, which is the kid-like part, which you actually see here with me right now. I am smiling, I'm animated, I am having fun. It's that kid that's only 5% that we see it very rarely, and like we actually may even miss it. That kid-like self, that thriver, is when I paint. And finally, when I'm having this kind of conversations, when I'm connecting with the person on the other side, that's when I am at my best. And that is the thriver part that we all have. But some people, would you believe, they don't even remember it? It's a small group of people who don't remember, but they do exist. So for anyone who's listening and does this exercise from the book and cannot find their way to a memory of thriving, know that when we survive, and I did some research on memory, how memories are, when we survive for a long time, that amygdala center, that fear center, is actually taking you to the memories, the hard memories, to remind you that it's scary outside of the waiting room, to protect you from actually experiencing more loss, more pain, more rejection. So it's reminding you of the non-thriving memories, so you don't remember the fun things and go out and take chances. Does that make sense? So
100%.
The thriver memories,
trying to keep
Michelle,
it safe,
get deleted. They actually we erase them. They're not accessible because we haven't visited them for so long. I was blown away. I mean, I was like, wow. I didn't know that's why there's some people who cannot even remember, because they've experienced so much loss in their life that they haven't visited that kid-like self. So for those who can't remember, we have to create new thriver memories, and we have to train ourselves to have fun again.
Yes.
So
it is our natural state. Just look at any toddler. They're literally, they just know intuitively. They're just conditioned to get up and find the joy and the play and the curiosity.
And I remember pushing back at the first time, saying, how everyone, we all have thrived, but it doesn't mean that you can remember it.
Yeah, that's important. And it's actually
that was
really
huge
important.
A lesson for me at the time. I mean, everything I learned, the whole process comes from the people, just listening.
You've worked with thousands of people, right? Yes. And across all cultures. And you say this is pretty, like, it's uniform in terms of like what we're talking about today. It's not that this is like an American thing, or right? Yeah.
I would say, because of the cancel culture we have here, it's very evident here.
Yeah.
We're so afraid. Imagine there's a collective survivor voice that lives outside of ourselves, that basically tells you, be careful how you speak in this interview, be careful what you tweet, be careful what you put out, how you present something, because you will be shut down if you say it in a way that is not accepted by what the norm is now, and that changes.
So people are censoring themselves even more.
A lot more. And I'm not saying we should all be out there sharing whatever is on our mind. I just think that we've gone too far on the other side.
Yeah. And the goal ideally is to get into that place of flow that you talked about in the beginning, which means that we are in alignment, that we are loving ourselves, that we know that we're going to get those times where, like you said, even just 6 weeks ago, where you're like
Yes.
questioning self-worth, but then like, okay, no, I know how to do the work and come back to my center and my knowing
Yes.
and our truth and live from that place. And that is always the invitation with this podcast. How do we get back to that place? How do we, so people can pick up the book and do the exercises, but just give us something about like, how do we begin to heal? So if somebody's listening and they're like, this all sounds great, but like, what's a first step that I can take today?
And I love this question so much because you don't need the book. Even if you just listen to this conversation, I kind of just say this, I hope you get the book, but this is what I want from everyone who's listening to this is to really consider this conversation, to consider it in their life and look at their life from a very different place. And the very first step you can do, I'm gonna give at least 2 or 3 different things people can do.
Yes.
The very first step would be there's a question in the beginning of the book that says, just tell me about your life as you see it now. Just give me what it is, whatever your life is. But here's some prompts, and one of the prompts is like, it could be something like, I grew up in a great place, I had great parents, but we have to start adding the back. And that is not because we're in complaining mode. It's not because I want people to look at the difficult things in our lives. It's about self-validation and about allowing ourselves to grieve and mourn something they've lost a long time ago.
Yeah.
And it's okay. Without that step, it was great. I had this and I had that, but often I felt this way. I don't know why. You won't know why at this point. This is early. You don't know. You don't need to know why. Right. Just that you're acknowledging that. So that's the first step. You grab a pen and a paper and just start writing from that place. I had these great things, but sometimes I felt this way. Whatever, and fill the gaps after that. Another way to do this is, let's say you have someone in your life that you trust, whether it's a really good friend that you feel like you could say anything you want. These are rare friendships. And if you have one of those, that's awesome. Yes. Or your partner that maybe you feel like you could have this conversation with them. Yes. You can do a cleanse. You can do a cleanse verbally with someone, or you can do it in writing form. And what is a cleanse? And if you did nothing else and you do those couple of things, you're on the path. And the path is long, but you're on the path. You can start having conversations with others. A cleanse is a stream of thoughts that are coming through, and you're letting it come through without changing it, without self-correction, whether it's coming through on the paper, because we actually self-correct, even if the only audience is ourselves. That's true. Unfortunately, that's the survivor coming in. You just write down whatever is on your mind, or tell someone this: there is a loss in my life that I have not discovered yet, and I want to have just a conversation for about 10 minutes, and I want someone to listen to whatever comes and just maybe reflect back what they're hearing. That's it. So you start downloading whatever is here, and it could sound like this. So for example, I'm sitting here with Michelle, and if I was to do a cleanse with Michelle is listening to me, and I have to, and I've been so present with my thoughts that I don't even have to, like, what else is here that I'm not saying. But let's say I'm sitting here and I want to, as if I'm writing this down, I want to say to Michelle exactly what's on my mind. It would be like this: I'm really loving this conversation. I'm having a great time. I hope Michelle is having a great time too. And oh my goodness, she could be my friend. Should I ask her to be my friend? Maybe we can chat another time. Is that okay to ask? And just, it goes like this. So let me show you now. The survivor self comes in and says, that's not cool. Well, you're not going to ask her to be your friend. Like, this is a professional conversation, even though it feels like this. So the survivor self has come in and has scripted something in that cleanse. And your responsibility is after you finish the cleanse, whether it's sharing with someone, my preferred way it is to write it, because then you can go back and read it. So you have it captured. You can record yourself if you want as well, if you want to speak it out. And then look at the pattern of fear and doubt.
Mm.
So the sentence of like, are you sure you should be asking her that? What if she didn't like you as much as you liked her? Like, this could be in any kind of new relationship. That is my survivor self coming in, stopping me from exiting whatever waiting room it is that I'm in, or out of fear of being rejected, because I've had a primary invisible loss and other invisible losses with a theme of rejection. I'm just giving a very generic example right now.
Perfect one.
The cleanse, by the way, is the most, it's the hardest. The other exercise can be challenging, but we start with the cleanse more or less in the beginning of the journey, especially when I did this in classroom settings where we had to cleanse in front of everyone else.
Oh, yeah. And once you see it, you can't ignore it either. That's the thing. And this is a daily practice. So you really...
It is a daily practice. Someone said this is like the pages. What's it?
Julia Cameron's morning pages.
But we have some steps after. Just we don't just cleanse and leave it there. We do have to find that pattern, because without the ability to look at what we wrote from that vantage point of removing the survivor voice, actually taking steps in our life might not be the right ones. We might be going to a different waiting room, because the people pleasing that takes place in this Western world is beyond the sky. Like, we people please so much.
Yes. Is there anything before we wrap up that you want to make sure you leave the women listening with today?
Just trust that voice that comes from that witness self, the watcher self. And it's going to be faint at first, especially if you have been someone who takes care of everyone else. But even if it's just a word or two words from doing the work, grab them, write them, put them in capital letters, put them on your mirror, sing them out loud, get them stronger. You have what it takes to find the right life for yourself, and you deserve the right life, not just a good enough life.
I was literally thinking, and you deserve it. And then you just said those words. Yes. I love that so much. Yes. It's so perfect. This has been such a beautiful conversation and such an important one. Invisible loss is real. This is a part of our lexicon now. We got to make it a part. It's like, and honor that in someone else. If you see somebody and they say, oh, I know it sounds silly, I just had this experience, I know it's not a big deal. You say, no, actually, that sounds like an invisible loss. We can start having these conversations to acknowledge and validate and let someone feel seen. And then also, it doesn't feel like a big wave when you are validated. It helps take some of that, like, this is real. Like, you're not like gaslighting yourself.
No, that's
right?
And I love that you just said that, because I think that's what's happening. We are not only gaslighting the world, we're gaslighting ourselves. And it's like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. You're fine. Get up.
Right. You've got a good job. You've got a family. Yeah. Why are you complaining? Just keep going. Like, this is as good as it gets. No, the message is good enough is no longer good enough once you have that awareness.
We're living in a modern world that we need to do better for ourselves. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. We're not even going to survive it, because this is a hard life. And it doesn't have to be so hard if we only take care of ourselves the way we just talked about. That's all we have to do. And look for it in others. Just like you said, Michelle, that was a great example of someone saying to you, well, no, I don't have anything to complain about. You've been through something much harder. Stop them right there and say, please tell me about it. That is important. Convince them of that. That is the best gift you can give to anyone.
Yes, let them be seen and heard. Yeah, we all need that. We all need that. And what a better world. And then maybe we'll actually be living our gifts and living in that flow, because that is the desire for every woman listening today. So where should I direct the women listening today, Christina? Where do you
If there was one step people to do, is just put the words invisible loss on Amazon and grab the book. I know the Audible is great, but if you were to choose one, I would choose the book, so you can spend time with the pages and do the exercises, because that's so important. And if you have more time, just go to ChristinaRasmussen.com and I have one painting up there, actually. I have the books, I have the blog and a painting. And we have, I created this invisiblelosses.com. It's a library of invisible losses, people who feel like they want to share it anonymously, like with 10 words or less. I imagined, and we don't use the emails. This is free. I have someone who goes and checks and uploads them. That's it. Imagine there's a place where all these invisible losses can be seen, and we can educate ourselves of what it looks like, and by reading other people's losses publicly.
Beautiful.
So it's like a library. So invisiblelosses.com, that's where that is.
And all of those will be over at thegoodlifecoach.com or on your podcast player. And just to go back to what Christina said, so one of your invisible losses was wanting to pursue art when you were younger. You had a loss around that, weren't able to do it, and you've picked that up in your 50s. So congratulations. It's never too late. Like, that's part of the message too. It's never too late. Let that wash over you and sink in. Not wash over, let that sink in.
And I'm graduating next year, and most of the people in these classes in school are with full-time jobs. We're doing this on the side. And it's been one of the most transformative experiences of my life, because I've always said, oh, maybe one day. I love it so much. I mean, this has been part of me ever since I can remember.
You reclaimed it, and you reclaimed it. And that's also part of the invitation. Reclaim those parts. It can be just for you. Just take that one class. It's okay. Just have some fun. Get connected.
There's no other purpose, just to have fun in the present moment. That's all. That's all there is to it. There's nothing else. Right. That's what we're here to experience.
Yeah, and see where it leads you. What a beautiful conversation. Thank you for the work you're doing. Thank you for your genius book and this concept of invisible loss. This is terminology that's been missing, that we need. We all need this to feel okay. Like, yes, feel seen. Yes. So thank you so much, Christina.
Thank you so much for having me and for holding this amazing space. I loved every second of it. I think you could tell. And thank you for when people invite me to their podcast, it's like inviting to your home. It's like you're with your family, which is your listeners, right? It's you inviting me to your community. Yes. I'm very honored and very grateful, and thank you. And this was amazing, Michelle.
Thank you so much. Me too. Hey friend, I have one request before we sign off today. If you've gained any value from any of the interviews that you've tuned into, would you take just 1 minute and leave a 5-star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts? It's actually how more women can find the show, and I want to continue growing a community of women who are loving themselves and living full on. So thank you for all of your support, and I look forward to being back with you next week. Bye for now.
This podcast is presented for entertainment and educational purposes only. Any information provided is not intended to be a substitute for medical, mental health, or other professional advice. Seek out your trusted healthcare provider or other qualified professional for all matters dealing with your health and well-being. Any opinions or information provided by a guest are their own and not those of Michelle Lamoureux or the company.